Hi, I'm Tony Constantine, an investment advisor representative with LifeMark Securities Corp. The views that I share with you on these videos are mine and do not necessarily reflect the views of LifeMark Securities Corp. Many of you may not recall, but I used to be an historian way back in the day. As a matter of fact, I taught history for a few years before I started in the business world. Anyway, since we're going to be talking about politics a little bit, I want to make sure that I read this so that I stay on message and don't leave anyone with a mistaken impression. It's good that we be accurate. Anyway, in the United States, we seem to have developed a two-party political system. I have my theories on how that happened and why it happened, but we're going to let it go for now because it's not really relevant to what we're talking about today. Our two-party system developed along the lines of conservatives on one side and liberals on the other. And over time, there have been some third parties, like the Anti-Freemasons and the Bull Moose Party, and then George Wallace came up with a third party, as did Ross Perot. But anytime there's been a serious third party, as long as they start gathering a following, well, their ideals were swallowed up by one or the other of the two major parties, the Republicans or the Democrats, and the third parties dropped by the wayside. So naturally, the big powers are making it difficult for the little guys to come around and participate. But that's the way it goes, I guess. Now, keep in mind that the names of the parties are names. They don't necessarily reflect the honesty or honestly reflect what the party's values really are. And I'm not going to go into that because that would be criticizing probably both parties, and I don't want to criticize anybody. You can do enough of that on your own. You don't need me for that. Anyway, the Democratic Party considers themselves to be the liberals, and the Republican Party considers themselves to be the conservatives. Which is kind of unusual because the Democrats were pro-slavery before the Civil War, and the Republicans were abolitionists before the Civil War. After the Civil War, and we know that the North won the war, President Lincoln was a Republican. He gets credit for freeing the slaves, and the United States elected a succession of Republican presidents. They did that primarily because the Democrats were all secessionists before the Civil War. They lost the war, so the Republicans naturally garnered more votes after the war. It's also the time when we had the robber barons making huge amounts of money, sometimes obscene amounts of money. The Vanderbilts, the Carnegies of the steel industry, the Vanderbilts with the railroads, J.P. Morgan with the banking system, and John D. Rockefeller with the oil. Those men made a whole pile of money. Anyway, in order to effectively argue against the Republicans, because it seemed at that point, after the Civil War during the Reconstruction, the Republicans were running the federal government, and the The big robber barons were making money hand over fist, so they were happy. But a lot of other people were unhappy. And the Democrats realized that since they were losing national elections, they had to do something to gather a big enough group of people together to win an election. That's when they started into what we call today identity politics. They started looking at the minorities and thinking, well, if we get enough minorities and enough people who feel like they're being cheated and ignored, we may start winning some elections. So that's what they did. After the war, they tried to gather the blacks, women, men who worked in the factories, the steel mills, and the oil fields, and places like that, and build these coalitions. They're still trying to do that today. And if you don't feel disaffected, they're going to try to find a way to make you feel like you're disaffected. Now today, what they're doing is they're being controlled by the far left wing or progressive part of the Democratic Party. And they've been pushing that agenda for the past 4 years and more, and deviating from the morals and mores of the majority of people of the United States. Now remember, when our country was founded, we had the Continental Congresses, 2 of them, and the National Convention to create the Constitution, because we needed a better framework for the government than the Articles of Confederation. Anyway, the delegates to those Congresses were generally landowners and lawyers. No surprise there. And for the most part, they were descendants of English settlers, which means that they were all, or the vast majority, were Anglicans. So when you look at the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, you see the embodiment of Christian morals and some Christian principles. Only natural, since they were all English, and their ancestors came from England, and were Anglicans, and just follows naturally, right? So there's no surprise that the majority of Americans were, and still are, at least as far as their morals are, pretty Christian morally. What happened in 2024 with the federal election, President Trump came out with America First, and it sounded pretty good to a lot of people because we've been getting beat up lately. And he came out with the Christian moral high ground because it opposed the majority of what the Democrats stood for the past 4 years. So if you want to know why Trump won the election, that's why. Because the Democratic Party went, I think, a little bit too far to the left. And Trump took the opposite position with them, soundly defeated them in the federal election, and won the presidency and both houses of Congress. That brings us up to today. All that's left today for the Democrats is to resist Trump. But when you're resisting somebody who's got the moral high ground and America first, you're actually trying to get the president to fail. And that doesn't sit well with a lot of Americans either. So they're left with what he didn't take, which is more of what got them defeated in 2024. And they don't know what to do other than resist. But again, resistance is, well, it's actually two things. It is trying to help the president to fail, which nobody wants to see the nation fail. And two, it sounds kind of insurrection-y, doesn't it? Okay. So it's difficult to attack somebody who's got the moral high ground and common sense on his side. And they don't seem to be handling that situation too well. Democrats don't seem to be coming up with any creative solutions to things. So all they're left with is fighting in the streets and going to court to defend criminal immigrants. That doesn't sound too good either, does it? But that's where we are and why we're here. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, my contact information will be on screen in a moment. Feel free to drop me an email or give me a phone call. Be happy to talk to you. Come back next week for our next exciting adventure in investing. Until then, make every day a great day.